This video is about Israel's strategic wars and the quest for national security. Subscribe for more. The night was thick with tension as the stars shimmered above the arid expanse of the Negev desert. It was 1967, and Israel was perched on the brink of a war that would alter the course of its destiny. The hum of military vehicles echoed through the hidden valleys, a prelude to chaos. In the heart of Jerusalem, a young Israeli intelligence officer, David Cohen, studied maps strewn across his desk, his brow furrowed. He understood the stakes better than most. The fate of a nation hung in the balance. Across the ocean in Washington, D.C., the atmosphere was equally charged. The United States had become Israel's staunchest ally, but the political landscape was riddled with uncertainties. President Lyndon B. Johnson sat in the Oval Office, deep in conversation with his advisors. He contemplated the ramifications of the looming conflict, worried at the outcome would shape America's foreign policy for decades. The shadow of the Cold War loomed large, with the Soviet Union backing Arab nations poised against Israel. As the sun dipped below the horizon, David's phone rang, piercing through the silence. It was Rena, a daring and resourceful operative in the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency. "David, we have reports of increased troop movements along the borders," she said, urgency lacing her voice. "Syria, Egypt, and Jordan are lining. We need to act fast." David felt the weight of impending doom settle on his shoulders. They had known this day might come, yet nothing could truly prepare them for the reality. Meanwhile, in Berlin, remnants of a different war still lingered in the air. The scars of World War II were fresh, and Germany was grappling with its past. The Berlin Wall stood as a divisive barrier, a constant reminder of the ideological rift between East and West. A former Wehrmacht officer, Hans Himmler, now served as an advisor to the West German government. Haunted by memories of his past, he found himself caught in the geopolitical web that was tightening around Israel. Hans had a singular mission: to ensure that Germany would not repeat the mistakes of its past. He believed in a stable, secure Middle East, but struggled against the rising tide of anti-Zionist sentiment that permeated Europe. His once proud nation was now viewed with suspicion, and he sought to change the narrative. During a late-night meeting with government officials, he argued passionately, "We cannot afford to stand by while history repeats itself. The security of Israel is intertwined with our own. We must support them." Back in Jerusalem, David and Rena plotted this strategy. With the threat of a multi-front war looming, they knew their only chance lay in a preemptive strike. The Six-Day War was not just a conflict, it was a matter of survival. As they exchanged intel, a flicker of hope sparked between them. They had a plan, but it was fraught with peril. David's heart raced as he laid out the details of a strategic air assault on Egyptian airfields, aiming to cripple their forces before dawn. The clock ticked relentlessly. With each passing hour, the tension grew, and David felt the weight of command pressing down on him. He gathered the leaders of the Israel Defense Forces, and they huddled around a table, the atmosphere crackling with electricity. General Moshe Dayan, an iconic figure in Israeli military history, looked around the room, determination gleaming in his eye. "Gentlemen, we are faced with a choice. We either act now or become victims of our own indecision." The plan was set. With dawn's first light, Israel would strike. As the pilots prepared for their mission, David watched them suit up, their faces a mixture of resolve and trepidation. Each man understood the gravity of the moment. Victory was essential, not just for Israel's survival, but also for the very ideals of freedom and democracy they cherished. While David felt an indescribable weight on his shoulders, he was ready. He knew failure was not an option. Meanwhile, in Cairo, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser watched the horizon as he prepared to unleash his forces. He believed he had rallied the Arab world behind him, his rhetoric fiery and impassioned. As he addressed his troops, his voice boomed with conviction. "Today, we reclaim our land. Today, we stand united against the Zionist enemy." The crowd erupted in fervor, a wave of nationalism sweeping through the ranks. Nasser's ambitions were bold, but deep inside, he felt the undercurrents of doubt. Back in the control room of the IDF, David monitored communication channels, aware of the delicate balance of timing. The sun's ascent painted the desert in hues of gold, obscuring both sides in the fog of war. Rena's voice broke through his concentration. "We just intercepted a message from the Egyptian command. They're replanning a counter-offensive at sunrise." The urgency heightened. The moment of truth was at hand. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the sky, David made the call: "Launch the attack." The roar of fighter jets filled the air like thunder, a symphony of destruction unleashed upon the enemy. The ground shook as Israeli bombs rained down on the unsuspecting Egyptian airfields. The element of surprise was theirs, but the battle was just beginning. In Berlin, Hans followed the news closely, a knot tightening in his stomach. He couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The repercussions of this conflict would be far-reaching, echoing through the corridors of history. He knew that the fragile alliance of nations would hinge on how both sides navigated the tumultuous waters of war. As David watched the chaos unfold, the repercussions of their actions rippled through the airwaves, crossing borders and oceans. Allies were being tested, loyalties questioned, and ideologies challenged. Every decision carried weight. Would Israel emerge victorious, or would this conflict become another dark chapter in its young history? A sudden explosion jolted David from his thoughts, and he realized the ferocity of the battle was escalating. Reports flooded in of clashes along the Golan Heights, where Israeli forces faced fierce resistance. The determination of the Arab coalition was palpable, their resolve unyielding. David's heart raced as he considered the implications of an Arab victory not just for Israel, but for the world stage. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm light on the battlefield below, David and Reen exchanged glances. A silent understanding passed between them. They were at the forefront of a struggle that would define generations. In the shadows, new alliances were forming, and the old powers of Europe were waking from their slumber, readying themselves to influence the outcome. The air crackled with anticipation as the war unfolded, and the stakes rose higher with every passing moment. For David, Rena, Hans, and countless others caught in the crossfire, the question loomed larger than life. Could Israel secure its future, or would the world witness a cataclysm that would shake the foundations of nations? In the chaos of war, where action often eclipsed reason, one thing remained certain: history would remember this day, and its echoes would resound through time. As the dust settled and smoke billowed in the distance, the fate of Israel and the balance of power across the globe hung precariously in the air, waiting to be determined. On the brink of an unprecedented era, the world held its breath, and the next chapter was about to unfold. Would the ghost of the past rise again to haunt them all? Only time would tell. The roar of the Israeli jets continued to echo through the arid landscape of the Negev, shattering the dawn's fragile tranquility. As bombs fell like rain upon the Egyptian airfields, the skies erupted in a cacophony of sound and fury. David watched through a field telescope, his heart pounding. Each explosion sent plumes of smoke spiraling into the blue, a testament to their preemptive strike. But the war had only just begun. In a control room, David's team relayed updates as they monitored the situation. Reports flooded in. Air defenses compromised. The Egyptian forces are scrambling, shouted one of the lieutenants, excitement mingling with apprehension. David clenched his jaw, pushing aside a flicker of doubt. They had struck hard, but Egypt was not without its defenses. The fight was far from over. Meanwhile, Rena was glued to her radio, intercepting communications. David, we were picking up movement along the Jordanian front. They were remobilizing troops. The urgency in her voice ignited a fire in his gut. We need to prepare for a multifaceted assault. If Jordan joins, we'll all be overwhelmed. Across the Mediterranean, Hans Emler's mind raced as he processed the news from the front lines. His ties to Israel were becoming increasingly vital, yet he had to tread carefully. The German government, still fragile from its post-war reconstruction, was grappling with its role in this new conflict. He knew that failure to support Israel could provoke another wave of anti-Semitism across Europe, a haunting echo of the past that he was determined to prevent. As he paced the dimly lit corridors of the West German government office, he met with his colleagues, urging them to take a stand. This is not just Israel's fight. The very ideals of democracy are at stake. We must show our support, even in the shadows of our own history. His voice was steely, but depth flickered in the eyes of his peers. In the heart of Jerusalem, David and Rena strategized their next moves. If Jordan moves, we need to strike first, David decided. The moment we hesitated, his thoughts trailed off, swallowed by the weight of possibility. Rena's eyes narrowed, her determination mirroring his. I'll coordinate with the Mossad operatives along the border. We'll gather intel on their troop movements. Hours passed like days, and as the sun reached its zenith, a sense of urgency gripped the IDF command. David's attention shifted to the growing reports from the Golan Heights, where Syrian forces were launching counterattacks. They were hitting us hard, David muttered. We need to reinforce the north. If we lose the Golan, we lose our strategic advantage. With a curt nod, Rena moved to relay the orders. David's mind was a whirlwind of strategy, calculations, and instinct. The stakes were undeniably high. Underestimating the enemy could lead to dire consequences, yet he felt the unyielding grip of destiny on his shoulders. In Cairo, Nasser rallied his troops, striving to harness the fervor of Arab nationalism. The gathering storm of war had ignited passions, and he stood at the helm, determined to reshape the landscape of the Middle East. Today, our brothers stand with us. We will not back down. His voice reverberated through the ranks, but even as he spoke, the weight of doubt clung to him. Had he underestimated Israel's resolve? Back in Berlin, Hans pushed for action, urging his government to take a decisive stance. A press release, something that shows our commitment to Israel. The ministers hesitated, torn between the past they carried and the future they hoped to build. A delicate balance hung in the air, but Hans would not relent. Without Israel's security, Europe's own safety is compromised. We cannot be mere spectators in this fight. As the hours turned into chaotic exchanges of fire, the conflict escalated. Reports of a fierce battle at the Golan Heights emerged. David's heart raced, his men were being pushed back. The Syrian forces, emboldened and fierce, were mounting a counteroffensive. We need air support now. David barked into the radio, his voice firm. The roar of jets was soon followed by explosions that resonated like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the conflict. But the tide was not easily turned. The Syrian defenses were holding strong, and David knew that every moment wasted could tip the balance against them. As updates streamed in from the front, Rena returned, her expression grave. We intercepted a message from the Syrian command. They are rallying reinforcements from the north. If we don't act quickly, we risk losing everything. The urgency in her tone ignited a fire within him. Prepare for a ground assault in tandem with the airstrike, David ordered, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. We can't afford to wait. As they prepared for the push, the tension was palpable. Soldiers readied their gear, determination etched into their faces. The battle for the Golan Heights had begun, and it was intense. The Israeli forces surged forward, and with each step they took, they were met with fierce resistance. A fierce firefight erupted, the sounds of gunfire mingling with cries of valor and desperation. David moved with his men, heart racing as they engaged with the Syrian troops. His training kicked in, instincts flaring to life as he led them through the chaos. Hold the line, he shouted, rallying his men in a desperate bid to seize control. Meanwhile, the news from Washington was brewing. President Johnson, watching the developments unfold, felt the weight of his alliance with Israel pulling at his conscience. With the Cold War tension spiraling, he faced pressure from both sides. We can't afford to look weak, he murmured to his advisors. The stakes for America's standing in the world were high, and every decision could reverberate through generations. As David fought through the chaos, he caught a glimpse of Rena, who was coordinating logistics on the ground. Their eyes locked, and in that fleeting moment, they understood the magnitude of their struggle. History was unfolding around them, and they were woven into the fabric of it all. But just as the tide began to shift in Israel's favor, the unexpected happened. An alarm blared through the command center. Incoming missile. From Jordan. The panic surged through the ranks as David processed the implications. The multi-front war was here. Everyone, take cover, he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. The ground trembled as explosions rocked the area. David felt the air thicken with uncertainty. The fight for survival had morphed into a fight for existence. As smoke billowed and confusion reigned, David realized that the conflict had transcended borders. The United States, Germany, and the wider European landscape seemed poised on the brink of a new reality. With allegiances tested and ideologies challenged, the world was watching intently in those moments of chaos. The battle for Israel's survival was not just a fight for land, it was a struggle for the future, for the right to exist and thrive in a world that had often turned a blind eye. As David braced for the next wave of conflict, he knew that the events unfolding would not only shape the destiny of Israel but would echo through the annals of history, intertwining the fates of nations. The question remained unanswered: would they prevail, or would this conflict spiral into a war that engulfed the entire region? As the dust settled over the battlefield, a new chapter loomed on the horizon, fraught with peril and promise. Would history repeat itself, or could they carve out a future that would honor the lessons of the past? With the echoes of war still ringing in their ears, the characters stood at the crossroads of fate, each grappling with their roles in a storm that threatened to engulf them all. The next confrontation was on the cusp, and the world watched as history hung in the balance. The chaos erupted around David like an unexpected storm, the battlefield transforming into a cacophony of sound and fury. He had anticipated the Jordanian forces joining the fray, but the reality of incoming missiles ignited a new level of urgency. As the ground shook beneath him, David shouted commands, rallying his men amid the confusion. Form defensive positions. We need to hold the line on all fronts. The Israeli soldiers scrambled for cover, their instincts kicking in as they activated their training. The roar of jet engines filled the air as Israeli aircraft circled overhead, a constant reminder of their fight for survival. The once clear skies now carried the ominous indicators of war, thick with smoke and the sound of distant explosions. Rena was beside him, her eyes scanning the surroundings, her presence a steadying force. "David," she cried, her voice piercing through the din. "We need to establish communication with the Northern Command. If Jordan pushes through, we'll be surrounded." He nodded, his mind racing. They had prepared for a multi-front conflict, but the reality was far more chaotic than they had anticipated. As he activated his radio, the crackle of static filled his ears. "This is Major David Cohen. We are under missile attack from Jordan. Reinforcements needed at the Golan Heights immediately. We can hold if they break through." The urgency in his voice pierced through the noise, and he felt the weight of responsibility for every soldier's life hanging in the balance. Back in the command room, the tension thickened. Reports streamed detailing the chaos from all fronts, a flood of information that could overwhelm even the most seasoned analysts. General Dane was pacing, his brow furrowed. "David, can we divert some of the air support to intercept the Jordanian missiles? Every jet is critical for the Egyptian airfields," David replied, knowing the fragile balance of resources. As they spoke, another explosion rocked the ground, shaking David's resolve. He turned to Rena. "We need to take the fight to them. If we don't act decisively, we could lose everything." "Agreed." "I'll coordinate with the ground units," Rena responded, her determination shining through the fear that gripped them both. The gravity of the situation was undeniable. They were on the cusp of a full-blown regional war, and every moment counted. As Rena moved to relay orders to their troops, David's focus shifted to the operational map still spread across the table. The markers indicating enemy positions were rapidly shifting. He knew that what they did next could alter the course of history. In the midst of the chaos, a message crackled through the radio, catching his attention. "This is Commander Levy in the north. We are sustaining heavy losses. The Syrian forces are counterattacking in waves. We need immediate air support." David clenched his fists, the weight of the moment pressing hard on his shoulders. "We can't allow them to breach the line. We have to act now, send in the reserve units to reinforce the Golan Heights." As the orders were dispatched, a determined fire ignited within him. He could not allow despair to take root. Their survival depended on the resolve of every soldier under his command. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Washington, D.C., President Johnson was grappling with the unfolding crisis. The Oval Office was alive with tension as advisors scrambled to assess the implications of the conflict on American foreign policy. "President, every day this escalates. Our credibility is on the line," one advisor urged, flipping through the latest reports. "We cannot afford to appear disengaged. The world is watching." Johnson leaned back in his chair, contemplating the gravity of the situation. "We have to ensure Israel as our support, but we must navigate this carefully. If we are seen as too involved, it could ignite further tensions with the Arab nations." Back in Jerusalem, the sound of gunfire erupted around David as he moved through the chaos on the ground, coordinating with commanders, every decision weighted with consequence. Rena returned, her eyes fierce. "We'll all need to move fast. Let us strike hard and fast. We need to regain the momentum," David replied, feeling the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "And get the engineers ready for any quick demolitions if we need to create barriers." As they executed the plan, David's heart raced. They launched a coordinated assault, Israeli forces moving swiftly to counter the Jordanian attack. The intense firefight broke out at the Golan Heights, bullets flying amid the shouts of soldiers determined to defend their homeland. David moved through the ranks, shouting encouragement, his voice ringing clear above the cacophony. "Hold the lines. Push forward. We fight for our homes." His words ignited a spark, and the soldiers rallied, driven by purpose and resolve. Meanwhile, on the other front, reports emerged that the Egyptian forces were regrouping, their retaliation gaining strength as they rallied under Nasser's fervent rhetoric. The intensity of the conflict surged, each battle pushing the stakes higher. As David assessed the situation, a chilling thought crossed his mind: could they withstand the full force of a united Arab front? In Berlin, Hans M. Lillo was closely monitoring the news. He had spent years reconciling Germany's past, and now he felt a sense of duty to influence his country's stance on the conflict. The streets were filled with protests, a wave of voices demanding action. The world cannot afford to turn its back on Israel, he argued during a meeting with German officials. We must show solidarity, not just for historic reasons, but for the future of democracy in the region. Hands impassionedly fell on mixed reactions. Some ministers nodded in agreement, while others expressed concern about the ramifications of aligning too closely with Israel. The ghost of their past loomed large, and Hans felt the weight of history pressing down, urging him to push for action. Back in Israel, the scene on the battlefield was unfolding with brutal intensity. David led the charge, adrenaline surging as he navigated through the chaos. The Israeli forces fought fiercely, their resolve matching that of the Jordanian troops. Explosions erupted around them, the din of war filling the air, drowning out individual voices. A sudden shout echoed through the melee. David, Rena's voice pierced through the chaos. He turned, heart racing. We've got enemy reinforcements approaching from the east. They're reflanking us, damn it. His mind raced with possibilities. We need to redirect our forces, get the tanks to cover the eastern flank. As the chaos continued, the tide of battle shifted again. The Syrian forces were relentless. Israel's counterattack was met with fierce resistance. The sound of gunfire and the cries of the wounded filled the air, thick with the acrid smell of smoke and gunpowder. Just as David felt hope reigniting, a thick tension gripped his stomach as a new threat emerged. Incoming from the east, shouted a soldier, and David looked up to see missiles streaking through the sky, trailing smoke as they descended toward Israeli positions. Everyone, take cover. David shouted, but the warning came too late. Explosions rocked the ground, sending soldiers flying and chaos erupting as they scrambled for refuge. The fight for survival intensified, the lines of battle blurring amid the escalating violence. In those harrowing moments, David's mind raced. What would be left of Israel if they could not withstand this onslaught? The fight was not just for territory, it was for existence, for the right to live free from fear. As he regained his footing amid the chaos, he knew they would need to pivot. The fates of Israel and the region hinged on their next moves, but every choice carried the weight of history. With determination boiling within him, David rallied his men, their eyes reflecting both fear and fierce loyalty. We have faced impossible odds before, and we will do so again. We are fighting for our homes, for our families. Let us show them what we are made of. As the soldiers rallied with renewed spirit, the echoes of war faded into the background. David understood that this battle was far from over, and the true test lay ahead. The world watched, the stakes rising ever higher as alliances were forged and broken, and the future hung precariously in the balance. With a final surge of adrenaline, David charged forward, aware that the next chapter was approaching. Would they secure their safety, or would the conflict spiral beyond their control, engulfing not just the region but the wider world? As the dust settled, a new dawn loomed, fraught with uncertainty, ready to unfold. David surged forward, his heart pumping adrenaline as he witnessed his men rallying behind him. The dust hung heavy in the air, acrid and thick, yet the resolve among the soldiers was palpable. He could not afford to let fear take root. They were fighting not just for territory, but for their very existence. Push forward, he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Each word ignited a spark in his men, their eyes reflecting a fierce determination. With renewed fervor, they charged, determined to reclaim the ground lost to the enemy's onslaught. The sounds of battle swelled around him, gunfire, explosions, the cries of wounded men, but David remained focused. He ducked behind a concrete barrier, assessing the shifting battlefield and noting the growing pressure from the Jordanian forces. Meanwhile, Rena coordinated with the units flanking the eastern side, expertly relaying orders to maintain their positions. David, she called out as she maneuvered through the skirmish, her voice steady. If we can disrupt their reinforcements, we stand a chance. He nodded, recognizing the strategic advantage. Let us send a small unit to ambush their supply trucks. It'll weaken their resolve. David's mind whirled with the possibilities, each decision threading tighter and tighter into the fabric of their fate. Back in Washington, President Johnson remained ensconced in the complexities of American foreign policy. The Oval Office buzzed with a whirlwind of activity. The situation is deteriorating, one advisor urged, watching the news reports flood in. If we don't act swiftly, we'll lose our credibility with Israel and the Arab nations. Johnson's brow furrowed. If we escalate our involvement, we risk igniting a broader conflict. He leaned back, considering the delicate balance of support and restraint, knowing that the eyes of the world were trained on him. Across the Atlantic, Hans Müller was tirelessly advocating for Germany's involvement. The echoes of history weighed heavily on him as he faced a room full of hesitant ministers. We must learn from the past, he urged passionately. Our silence today could lead to atrocities tomorrow. It is our duty to stand with Israel to ensure that democracy prevails in the region. Some in the room nodded, their expressions reflecting the complexity of their decisions, while others hesitated, still plagued by the shadows of their history. The hands as resolved did not waver. Let our support be our message to the world. We are not the same nation we once were. Back on the battlefield, the tension mounted as reports streamed in from the front lines. The Israeli forces were bearing down on the Jordanian flank, their spirits bolstered by the unity they found in adversity. David felt the tide shifting. We will take them by surprise, he instructed Rena, who was already in motion, orchestrating the troops with precision. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the desert terrain, the Israeli soldiers executed their plan. A small contingent slid through the brush, silently making their way toward the enemy supply route. David watched from a distance, heart racing in anticipation. The moment they struck would be crucial. Every second mattered in this precarious game of life and death. Explosions erupted as the ambush unfolded. The enemy was caught off guard, and chaos ensued. David felt a surge of hope as the Israeli forces pressed their advantage, pushing back against the Jordanian advance. He shouted, encouraging his men to seize the momentum. But as victories came with one hand, losses were felt in another. News from Golan Heights indicated that the Syrian forces were regrouping. "We were facing heavy artillery fire," came the urgent voice over the radio. They were not backing down. David clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of the world pressing on him. "We need to redirect forces to the Golan, reinforcements now." The battle raged on, the line shifting as the day wore into night. David fought alongside his men, each skirmish feeling like an eternity. And just as they began to gain ground, a chilling realization struck him. The coalition among Arab nations was tightening, and their resolve seemed unyielding. In the control room, Rena's face reflected the same dread. David, the intelligence reports indicate that Egyptian forces are mobilizing for a second wave. We were not out of the woods yet. Her voice was steady, but David could sense the undercurrent of fear. As the sun finally set, the darkness brought with it a sense of foreboding. David, weary but undeterred, gathered his commanders around him. "We have fought valiantly, but this is only the beginning. We need a new plan, one that will solidify our hold and send a message to our enemies." His voice rang with conviction, and the room filled with an electric energy as they began to strategize. They would launch an all-out assault at dawn, harnessing the cover of darkness to reposition their forces. It was a gamble, but one they had to take. The stakes were too high to do anything less. As the night wore on, tension gripped the air. Across the ocean, the ripple effects of the conflict reached Washington, where President Johnson was forced to reconsider the United States' role in the unfolding crisis. "We must act decisively," he finally proclaimed. "Israel is more than an ally. It is a bulwark against extremism in the region. We cannot afford to stand idly by." With his approval, plans for military support began to solidify, setting the stage for a new level of engagement, one that would reverberate throughout Europe and beyond. On the battlefield, David and Rena prepared for the dawn assault, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The Israeli forces were weary, but determination coursed through their veins. "We are not just fighting for land," David reminded them, his voice steady amidst the tension. "We are fighting for our way of life, for our right to exist without fear." At dawn, as the horizon brightened with potential, the Israeli forces surged forward. The air rang with the cries of battle, the clash of wills as the soldiers fought with a fervor that was palpable. Explosions lit the sky as they pressed the attack against the Syrian and Jordanian forces, each ounce of resistance met with their unyielding resolve. As the battles raged, the tides began to shift. News from Washington echoed through the command center. The arrival of American support arrived just in time, providing the Israeli forces with the firepower they needed to turn the tide. Irina shouted, her eyes sparkling with a glimmer of hope. With renewed vigor, Israeli soldiers pushed forward. The chaos swelled like a storm, but in that whirlwind, they found their strength. The battlefield became a testament to their resilience, each soldier embodying the spirit of a nation determined to survive. In the heat of the conflict, David's heart raced as he fought alongside his men. The sounds of gunfire and the cries of the wounded filled the air, but amidst the chaos, victory began to emerge on the horizon. The Jordanian and Syrian forces, overwhelmed by the relentless Israeli advance, began to falter. As the sun set on that fateful day, David stood amidst the debris of battle, breathless but resolute. The outcome had reshaped the region, weaving the fates of nations together as the dust settled. It was a victory that would reverberate through history, marking a pivotal moment in the story of Israel and its allies. In Berlin, Hans received the news with a mix of relief and apprehension. The tide had turned in Israel's favor, but the implications were far-reaching. The world would be watching closely, and the narrative of Germany's stance on Israel would need to be carefully crafted. Back in Washington, President Johnson faced the reality of a new foreign policy landscape. The alliance with Israel had deepened, carrying with it newfound responsibilities. "We will not abandon our allies," he declared, aware that this commitment would define America's role in the Middle East for generations. As the smoke cleared over the battlefield, David and Rena exchanged glances, knowing that they had not just fought for their survival but had redefined their nation's destiny. They had stood at the forefront of a struggle that would echo through the ages, a testament to the spirit of a people determined to carve out their place in a tumultuous world. The quest for national security had transformed into a fight for identity, for freedom, and for the very ideals that would shape the future of Israel, Germany, Europe, and beyond. As history unfolded, the echoes of their struggle reverberated through time, a reminder that even amidst the darkest storms, hope and resilience could light the way to a new dawn.